Welcome to the Astrology Show. My name is Nick from Astrology Explained. You can find me on YouTube or Facebook. Search Astrology Explained.
My name's Mike. I'm with Mutual Reception Astrology. You can find that on Facebook or on Instagram.
All right, let's see. Oh, what a fun month we've had. How's it going? How's it going in the world? Anything interesting going on?
Nothing's happened since last month
Yeah.
when we did our first of these,
Yeah.
luckily. So we don't really have that much to catch up on.
Yeah. I guess. Well, that's it. Good show, everyone. Yeah. Well, America is sure going through some fun times right now. We have, I mean, just in the wow, since our last recording, we have a bunch of issues with racism happening, and issues, well, obviously the unfortunate, really sad event with George Floyd, and then obviously the protests and the aftermath of all that, and riots, if you want to call it that too. And it's bigger than I think we've seen. Again, just like with like the COVID stuff earlier this year, it's like bigger than it has been in the past. It seems like these protests are bigger than the protests in the past. Why, and what's going on with that? Like, what is the energy that is pushing what's going on right now? And let's talk about that with Pluto, I think.
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things is that the chart of America is going through its Pluto return. A lot of countries don't live long enough to have a Pluto return. There's a few on Earth that have lived through a couple, but often a Pluto return is a time of great upheaval, great transformation for a country. So the fact that the U.S. is in the midst of one, we are within orb of a direct Pluto return. I think it's going to be direct come 2021. And you can tell that there's a lot of transformation boiling just under the surface. It's starting to come to the surface. And a lot of this is a long time coming. So we'll do our best to get in depth about America's chart and America's Pluto return.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a long time coming. And like, I mean, just jumping right with Pluto, we had Pluto move into the sign of Capricorn, years ago. I think it was 2008, 2009. It kind of jumped and then moved officially. And since that time, I mean, even before all this stuff this year, or even before the 2016 elections, that was kind of like a turning point with the Pluto and Capricorn stuff. Like, we saw like, quote unquote, the transformations of corporations, and kind of the adjustment of like different large corporations were buying out others. Like, I mean, Disney is a big example, but just the idea of like this kind of like a transformation of how things are done as well. Like whether it's how media is done. Netflix took off, like the transformation of people don't go to movie theaters anymore, not just because of COVID, but before that even. And I guess just the idea of the transformation of these established, pick anything, and the establishment in that thing, the established like ideas or authority in that thing is transforming, and it has been brewing for the past roughly 10 years, kind of under the surface. And like what you said, as it's coming close to the exact return, it's coming to the surface. And then now, and with the social issues even more so, and they really started to take off. I think after the Pluto Uranus square was like exactly in the mid 2010s, as it's starting to pull apart. I think like that energy is kind of still there, but there's other energy now, and a lot of it is the Pluto and then the Saturn aspect. This energy that's happening now to me is more the Pluto mixed with Jupiter, Saturn, and then square to the Eris energy of like that kind of form of, it's not revolution in a Uranus sense. It's like shit's coming out and it just has to come out. And that's what we're seeing, like where it's like a revolution will happen, and it's like there's this more of a directed focus of like what needs, like I guess people have more like, when you have progress, you want to bring about change. Now it's more about just raw, this shit is not working, these are all the things that are wrong, people have reached their breaking point.
Well, definitely with Pluto in Capricorn, you have a real challenge of major institutions of our country. I would say that there's certain levels of corruption with some of our major institutions that there has been so much resistance to deal with over the course of generations that corruption has eroded faith and trust in those institutions from a lot of the population. And the U.S. has always had kind of a little bit of a duality to it, in that we started out this country, if you go by the Sibley chart, which is one of the mini charts of the U.S. Foundation, We started out with Pluto in the second in Capricorn, which means that the U.S. tends to project what it needs for its country, what it needs for its own growth. It tends to project its shadow onto others that have those items or, that resource that it needs, and then use that projection as a way to move forward on it and get community and community buy-in on it. And I think that that's something that's really coming up again. There's a lot of things that the U.S. has done that many parts of the U.S. don't really like to look at, and I think that that's an interesting part of the U.S. Pluto return, is the shadow side of our country. Some of the things that we don't really like to look at squarely in the eye are kind of bubbling back to the surface for us to look at. Even if it's uncomfortable, we're being forced to deal with it. And that discomfort is causing a lot of crashes in the intersections out there, and not just the Twitterverse, not just social media, but actually in some of the intersections in our actual country.
Quite literally. Yes, absolutely. And and it's I mean, understandable, like the frustration with that corruption, because it's been there boiling. And you're right, it's like, as long as it can get away with itself, like people just don't, people are comfortable enough, especially with the second house stuff, as long as we're comfortable enough, like with our resources, what we have, the kind of the what was the kind of the American ideal of just like having a house, having a car, like being materially comfortable and having what you need and food. And as long as people have those things, sure, like we kind of can ignore, if you have a job and you're working and your focus is just, your life, your immediate life, you're not going to like be focused on the corruption in government, like if it doesn't directly affect your life. But like it's coming out to a point where it is directly affecting so many people's lives. And like, I mean, even just this year, obviously, and it's kind of perfect with Saturn moving there to kind of be the authority figure to say like, all right, let's do this. Like, it's time to like open this floodgate. And I think like, more people now, especially with the COVID stuff, have realized like, I'm not comfortable. And then so I'm going to, like, whether it's they don't have their job anymore, so they have more time to spend trying to understand things more, or like look at that corruption or whatever it is. It's like the synchronous thing where things are at their worst. Like one could say like, the corrupt elements are trying to like make a push to kind of gain more power, because that is also signaled in the Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn conjunction. But at the same time, as they do that, it draws more attention, more and more people see it. It's more obvious. I mean, I don't need to make that point anymore. It's just the more you come out above the surface, the more you can be seen, the more it's obvious, the more people see it. And then that's where the transformation happens. Because the transformation, like the Pluto transformation, it doesn't just magically happen. You know what I'm saying? Like something has to happen to force the transformation. And I mean, like something has to happen in the real world. Like, like if, say, we didn't have the COVID stuff, like what would be the thing that would get people to like look at, the issues, like, and basically force people to go through as a nation, our Pluto return. And so I just think it's interesting how, like, I guess it's like have a little, or just, it's like a nice, have some faith in, like, quote, the universe or whatever, because it's like things come up with Pluto, things are the worst, but at the same time, that's when the transformation is happening. So it feels like the worst. And it's like, like, this is fucking crazy. Like the world is falling apart or whatever. But that's when, like, that's kind of like, because otherwise the stuff is below the surface and it's always there and it always has power, and that power is unknown. But like when it's up on the surface and everyone can see it, and that's when that transformation can happen. And it has to, unfortunately, it usually has to come through difficult experiences. Otherwise, why would you transform, I guess, especially as a nation?
Well, comfort is the enemy of change, I think, is a pretty universal statement. And Pluto is definitely the discomfort that precedes change in a lot of ways. The interesting thing about the U.S., well, let's get into kind of the plutocracy. So one of the things that's always been true about the U.S., although we are a democracy, is we've always been pretty much ruled by an elite that represents wealth in our country. There's been some pushbacks on that. There's been fights over. There's been fights in our history that often are glossed over against central banks. There's been losses where we have been ruled under central banks. There's been more and more more and more the legislation that passes through our Senate and our House through either party uh, typically benefits 99% of the time is going to benefit the top percentages of our country. There's been a few clawbacks that have happened because of major public pressure, such as like the union movement over the course of the 30s. The Depression was such a big hit to kind of public morale and public comfort that pushed us forward to get Social Security when we didn't have anything like that before. And whatever can be said about that, Social Security was during the Pluto half return, like the Pluto opposition when Pluto was in Cancer. So Social Security was pretty much a give to the public to keep public anger from rising any higher at the time, because there's always the latent possibility, since our country was started in a revolution, that we could see another one. That energy of not being okay with being ruled over by an out of touch elite was what led to the formation of our country. Unfortunately, we also have moved towards being ruled by an out of touch elite. And there's a certain duality that kind of where our public, whether, especially if they're non-elite, tend to get on one of the two elite teams and then think that the other team is the one that's causing all the problems. And that's something that we really talked about a lot last month, was the polarization that is becoming more and more visible in the American public. But that polarization tends to get caught up in teams that actually represent elite agendas. And often even our righteous anger can be used to, even the righteous anger of non-elite Americans can be used towards elite ends. And I think that's one of the real worries that we've got to pay attention to during the US Pluto return.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And I think part of that, it's like, why as a country or why as people do we want that? Why do we want people to not control us, but I guess it's like we give away our authority in some ways. And I understand that that's, government is supposed to be ideally a representation of the people. It's not supposed to be something that rules us and that, tells us how to live and tells us what to do. It's supposed to be, you're there to run the administrative side of what we value basically as a nation. And I think, people maybe with the Pluto and Capricorn in the natal chart and then having the return happening now, it's like maybe we're supposed to grow up as a nation. It's like become your own authority. Like Capricorn, you know, in an ideal sense, is like they have their stuff together and they're they're very put together. They're responsible. And self authority is, I think, a big theme. And it's like the transformation, because it's like as long as you rely on others or government or whatever for authority or for whatever that authority provides you, whether it's a feeling of protection or just a feeling of I don't have to make the decisions for myself, someone else will do it for me. I think that's something that, like, as long as we as a country have that attitude, or the majority of us, or then people will come in and say, okay, we'll provide that for you. And those people usually are not, they don't have, you know, benevolent intentions usually. And so I think, one way to counter this, especially during this, like one other side of the Pluto return would be like, and especially because it's in the sign of Capricorn, is that kind of like, it's time to grow up as a people, and not like literally, but just emotionally, mentally, where we go like, okay, I'm in charge of myself first, and then we're a nation, and then bringing that to the table instead of like not, because there's so much people or so much happening right now, just blame or not taking responsibility. It's because of something else, or it's because of someone else, or it's because of this group, and the whole victim stuff, which is a separate thing. It's also the Neptune and Pisces stuff, but just a way out of that, or a way to kind of help that, would be to kind of for everyone to understand, like with all the Cap stuff right now, it's like emphasize on, because Capricorn gets a bad name sometimes, because it's like, oh, it's Capricorn, it's authoritative, but it's like, but it's also mastery. It's mastery over yourself, mastery over the personality, mastery over the material world, like in the ideal sense. And so it's like working towards, like, what does that mean, like as a country, if we all were quote masters over ourselves? I mean, again, very idealistic, but I think that part of it, like if we don't want people to come in and become our masters over us, you have to it's like it's the responsibility is on us to step up and I guess take control of ourselves, which then in turn, like, government is just a reflection of the people. And so the more authoritarian government gets, it's like besides the nefarious influences, it still is in part a reflection of the people. And so I think that the other side of that is that we can look at ourselves as a nation. So like, well, how can we move forward, to not have these? Oh, I mean, obviously there's a lot more to that, but like, how can we move forward without these kind of like issues that we have as far as like authority and like the kind of established uh, ideas and authorities. But I guess and then going off of that, I guess it's like, well, how do they, how do people manipulate the American people? Why do we fall for this? And I guess that then leads to the aspect in the U.S. natal chart of Mercury in Cancer opposite Pluto, and it's it's a 3-degree orb, so it isn't like the strongest. But I think because it is Pluto, I'm willing to give it a slightly bigger orb because it's such slow moving, and right now all the stuff in Capricorn is opposed to the U.S. natal Mercury as well, and the Pluto opposite Mercury, like to me, it's like if even just in the individual natal chart, like that's like if like say you have like a synastry chart of someone with a Pluto and they have it opposite someone else's Mercury, like one person's going to be able to like manipulate the other person. Like it, Pluto and Mercury, like Mercury is smart and tricky and clever and stuff, but Pluto can like understands your deepest issues and the thing your biggest wounds, your biggest ego spots, and like on a more superficial level, like if you look at the media, just in the media alone, like how we pull the emotional like triggers that it does, like what every news story is, oh my god, every doom and gloom, or it's like an emotional sob story. It pleases our collective Mercury. It stimulates that part because it's in Cancer. It wants to kind of just feel nice, like feel good in a sense of like comfort and safety. The Mercury side of it too, I think, just ties in with like, because it's like, how does elite groups or whatever, the corrupt people, how do they control or get what they need done? Because it isn't just in politics, it's you have to control the culture and you have to influence the culture, I guess. And how is that done? That's done through media.
The US has some of the most subtle mass media propaganda in history. Like we have perfected some aspects, and it's in our 8th house. So our Mercury is in Cancer in our 8th house for our whole country. So the way that we're kind of manipulated via media is pretty under the surface. You have to dive pretty deep into understanding how our media works, what triggers they hit in us, in order to have any kind of understanding of how we're being manipulated. But there have been people over the course of time that have learned that, well, one of the big aspects of the US is one of the ways that one of the theories that people went off of when they were starting to figure out how mass media, especially TV, could be used to change public opinion. One of the big things that we learned was some of those under the surface aggressive impulses could be kind of turned from advertising into purchase decisions. So that's why, often sex or toughness or violence is used to sell things to us. It allows us to kind of deal with these under the surface unconscious emotions and deal with them in a way that supports kind of the capitalistic enterprise that the US is. And I think it's pretty important to recognize that the US is a very capitalistic system and has been for a really long time. And mass media is so connected. I mean, mass media basically doesn't say anything that's going to affect any of their advertisers. If you very rarely see mass media even holding other mass media chains to account. You notice that there's been deep consolidation over the course of time of mass media where it's less and less companies. I mean, you used to have, even 30 years ago, you used to have 12 to 15 major media companies. And now we're down to really, I think, 6 in the US. It might even be less because Disney's been buying up mass media lately. So we have media that's supposed to be for the people, but is largely captured by the same kind of corporate or capitalistic forces that have captured our government. So it tends to reflect back to the US kind of elite consensus or move us towards emotional reaction to things that are happening. So if it benefits the elite for the public to be fighting in a very dual polarized way, that's what we're going to get pushed at us through our media. We're going to be told that the other side is terrible, our side's the good one. Instead of dealing with our own kind of shadow of our side, everything is projected upon the other side. One of the interesting things that I've seen on Twitter, which is definitely a mercurial and emotional. I mean, we have Mercury in Cancer as a country. One of the things that I've definitely seen in Twitter, which is often very emotional opinions, is you have both sides, kind of the Republicans and the Democrats, saying that everything that the other side says about them is projection. And the reality is that's not always true, but sometimes it's true, but it's not always true. And just thinking that one side has the end all be all of truth is part of the reason that we're in this mess where there's much less trust of media, or there's only trust in siloed media that represents your own emotional opinion, you know, or our own emotional opinion.
Yeah, it confirms it and just makes it. I mean, it's like, no offense to Mercury and Cancer, if anyone has that, but I wouldn't attribute that as being like a. I mean, that Mercury doesn't want to like stretch and like go, delve deep and like try to like go to the uncomfortable places in that sign. In my opinion, it just wants to kind of it's not looking to like it's a lot about like just kind of expressing like, this is how I feel, this is me, this is like, and then exactly what you're saying, like projecting onto the other person, and like even with like the media, what you're talking about, like the fake, like, Fox News or CNN, like that, we're like, we're so against each other. No, they're not. Like they both like are they I think they have like similar shareholders and stuff. It's like just it's that kind of same idea. It's like but people like, exactly, it's like this is like the the controlled, or just like the shaped, like, okay, this is how we want people to think, and like this is the other side, this is how we want you to think. It's like it's just I agree. It's like, what I guess for me, it's like, what I we already are having a transformation happening with like both with just independent media, quote unquote, whether online, podcasts, etc. People who are, and there's more access to it now. But like, what I mean, and so media is transforming. Like they're losing money like crazy. You're seeing a lot of like media that took off in the 2010s, like different like online media having to like sell or combine and buy into each other. And like, what do you see as like the change that is going to happen? Like, I mean, obviously we'll still have the media. Like it's not like something that like transformations aren't so drastic that it's just like cut and dry, like on or off. But like, what do you see the transformation happening as far as like do you because like idealistic me thinks like people are gonna all like learn how to like look for the facts and like look to like media that isn't so biased or isn't trying to like manipulate them. But like that's obviously not going to happen. But like, as far as the transformation of just like the practical side of media, and like, what do you see is going to happen like in the next maybe like 5 years? And I guess when I say media, I mean specifically like news, and also independent news, and like and people who like do journalism in general and commentary. Like, what do you see is going to happen with in our country and stuff in the culture with that?
I think it's been democratized a lot, whereas more people are able to kind of be reporters in their own community. But it's also been devalued quite a bit. Whereas just being a reporter is, I mean, being a reporter, you do not make the money that you used to. unless you're working for one of the big corporations. And there are some people that do kind of long form investigative news that are able to do well in kind of the new media landscape of like podcasts and long form interviews on the internet. But those new forms are quickly becoming more and more kind of captured by the same advertising dollars that bring you such a problem for like the big companies like the CNNs and the MSNBCs and the Fox Newses of the world. In fact, if you have like say a YouTube channel where you're trying to bring the news to the people, the way that you make money off of a YouTube channel is by the advertisers. And if you're talking about something that, you know, elites don't want you to talk about, you're going to get demonetized. So there's a few podcasts and a few people that have been able to kind of get around that demonetization, but they have a pretty established fan base and they go outside of just YouTube advertising to keep themselves afloat. So the future might be kind of like what No Agenda, the podcast, is, where the way to have independent news is to get people to value it enough to actually support it with their dollars, you know, like whether it be like a subscription kind of base or giving money when they can. That might be the thing that allows independent media to flourish. But certainly we're seeing a lot less eyeballs on print media and a lot less eyeballs on TV media. And the way that they've been reacting to that is to kind of get more and more salacious, more and more emotionally driven, more and more clickbaity, which I think actually speeds up the destruction process. We're almost at a peak of that, since we are right. Pluto is basically exactly opposing the U.S. Mercury right now, and it will be for the next couple weeks. And we're really seeing a chaotic media landscape like we haven't seen in our lifetimes, I don't think. We've seen the breakdown of the media landscape, but we haven't seen it under such existential threat in our lifetimes. And I can't really think back to when there's been this much of an existential threat before, besides like muckraking. And I think that might have been during the Pluto half return again, when probably Pluto was conjunct the U.S. Mercury.
Absolutely. Could I just jump in real quick with that? Because I think you just made me think of like, Pluto is opposing the U.S. Mercury at, you know, their 24 Cancer cap, and interesting. Like, I always talk about this, but Eris is directly square those two at 24 Aries, and what you said just made me think like Eris. Like, I always attribute it to like the people who are like kind of causing the transformation stuff, but it's also the media has taken on that energy as well, because you can see where they don't give up. Their motivation is not to provide information. Their motivation, it's like almost, you can see like not everyone obviously, but there's like this like level of like causing discord and causing strife in, you know, our culture and in our country. Like, you know, I'm not trying to blame the media for everything, but they are 100% a part of the, you know, adding to the strife and discord and all and disruption in our country right now. Like, you know, it's not, you know, they're, you know, what they amplify will cause people to become angry at. What they don't amplify doesn't, you know, doesn't get talked about. And, you know, and so I just wanted to bring that aspect of it. And then the other side is, when you were talking about the like the idea of value for value and all that stuff, and the transformation of like, you know, I think there is a transformation happening in like how we consider the value of money, and also like what we value. And it's like, it's all second house stuff so beautifully said. It's like it fits those themes, and that just makes me also it reaffirms that I think the US Sibley chart is the correct one, because the second house is getting hit so much, and it's like we're seeing that. And so like I've just heard other people talk about other charts for the US. I think the Sibley is correct, because the second house, like, it's what we value. It's money. It's like our resources. It's how we use our resources, and what we value is what we spend our money on, obviously. And like, so it's this like idea of like going from like being manipulated, so to speak, into what we spend our money on, and feeling like we have to spend our money for certain reasons, whether it's an an ideal that's been created for us, or security, safety, and a feeling of need because we have a lack of stuff. But like the transformation happening is like, as a country, and this is controversial, but we're the wealthiest country in the world by far, and we have, and not just with physical resources, but with just obviously like our ability in this country. And I'm not trying to get like into the whole like, oh, American ideal, like we're the best country in the world, but it's like we are the richest country in the world as far as just our influence, um, our connections to other countries, our physical resources, and then our land mass. We have a really nice country. It has a very diverse climate. It's great for growing crops. It has, and we have I mean, so there's all these aspects of America where it's like we have it so good, but people, again, I'm not. This is as a country. I'm not talking because every individual has things that they struggle through, and it's not even for everyone. So I'm not trying to, but like the wealth is not I mean, it's like we have so much wealth, but obviously it's been taken and moved to, the top. A lot of it has, and that's just a fact. Like there's most of the wealth is at the top, what the 1% type thing, and but at the same time, that wealth is still our country still has that wealth, and so it's like the transformation I see happening as far as like money and what we value and stuff. Like I don't know what's going to happen there, but it's like something's got to give because like I don't know. Trump taking over just the fact, like, I think him using the Treasury to take over, or the Federal Reserve Bank, he used the Treasury. It's now under like regulation of the Treasury. That's a huge step that I think just kind of got swept under the rug because it's the start of like a transformation of like, because the Federal Reserve Bank, that's a whole nother issue we can talk about another time. But like that is a big part of the Pluto in the second house for America, and so I I think there would be transformations happening in the way that the idea of how we do money and like the kind of the debt cycle we've been in, and how people have like, I mean, our attitude towards, well, you're just going to get a credit card, get in debt, and then it's just live this kind of work and be always. I think that is going to change in the sense of like what we value, and like I don't think the system is going to support that kind of living because it doesn't. It's not healthy, obviously, but yeah.
My final thought, I guess, on the U.S. chart, just to kind of talk directly to things that have been happening recently, is one of the issues that America is going to have when it goes through its Pluto return is kind of directly looking at its shadow and certain debts that we have that haven't been paid or haven't been at least paid in full. This is something that I've gone back to quite a bit over the course of my life, but it's something that maybe the craziest Democratic candidate, Marianne Williamson, actually talked about a little bit. When slavery was ended in the U.S., there was a promise made to every freed slave that they would get 40 acres and a mule. And if you think about that in terms of, that's actual physical real estate, that's the ability to work the real estate that you have. It's a fundamental material beginning for people. If it had been done, it would have represented, a debt that probably couldn't even have been paid with just that, considering the labor of centuries that had been kind of extracted from the slaves in the U.S. But it was never given. That promise was never lived up to, and there are a lot of things that happen to people in poverty. I think if you really look at police violence and you look by the income quintile that people are in, you're going to notice that whatever race people are, that the people in the bottom quintile of income are going to be more likely to have negative interactions with the police or violent interactions with the police. You're going to, if you have like generational poverty, there's a lot of problems that come with that. And part of the reason that the U.S. is kind of caught up in this cycle is because we owe this debt, and it's a material debt, but it also has spiritual and moral implications. And until we can kind of look directly at that aspect of our history, and realize that that debt is real, and that just because we are not the people that that created that debt doesn't mean that we're out of it. I think that those are issues that are really coming up in the U.S. because as much as our shining ideals of democracy are good, there are some big fundamental errors that we made at that time too. So I think that this is the things coming to the surface with Black Lives Matter have a lot of historical precedent, and they have a lot of historical precedent in what the U.S. Was involved with over the course of time. So I think that it's interesting that's coming up. It could be really good for us, but it's definitely an uncomfortable transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just I would agree, and I think that looking at it from like my only issue with that whole concept is that in theory and in ideals, it's 100% like the I agree and I think it's great, but in practicality, how and that's where I get I'm not one to figure that out, and you're not. I mean, I don't know if you know have any ideas about that, but it's just more like. But I agree with you as far as like kind of a because as long as we have that shadow as a country, we're going to have issues. You're right. Things are going to come up, and we're going to have this undertone of racism that will pop up, at times, and we'll have this undertone of like classism that pops up at times, and this kind of and violence against these classes and these people and the races, and like you're right. It's not going to go away. So we either deal with it and then like level up, so to speak, or fucking repeat the next what? How long is Pluto? 250 years? Yeah, like I feel like it's like at this point, just some form of like monetary reset or something. It would be the only way because, as much as I agree with you that like yeah, we need to make that wrong justified and like basically like like purge our shadow for lack of better terms and like purge all the shit so we can start fresh. Like I don't know how we would do that on a practical level, I guess. Like because it's so like I don't know, it would just be a lot of work, I guess. And maybe that's just my own like bias. I'm just like, oh God, that sounds like a lot of work. But just to basically try to figure out all of that and like who gets what and how much and like how do we make it balanced so that everyone, so it doesn't cause more problems than it's fixing basically. But at the same time, that's more of like the nitpick ticky tack bullshit as far but the general idea I'm 100% behind because we're not going to move forward as a country in a positive way if we don't deal with our shit and our shadows. And it's like, I guess it's just how do we go about that? And I guess with like, I mean, idealistically, like shit, let's just fucking do a debt reset, everything, monetary reset. We're all on the same page. We're all on the same level now. But then does that actually address it? Or is that just trying to like sweep it under the rug and start fresh? I think like I'm too future oriented and I think I can like practice looking, especially with like all the cancer stuff coming up now and the new moon in cancer and the eclipse in cancer. It's like cancer is not about the future. Cancer is not future oriented. And so maybe that's where it's like this, especially with this eclipse coming up, which we're about to get into the getting into the astrology of the next month. So we're in, cancer season, and cancer is all about among many things like the past and like kind of like feeling comfortable and like focusing on like, where you come from and your family. And I think just yeah, you're right. Like being working, and we as a country are a cancer country, and so I think yeah, we do have to really. I can't avoid that as we have to address these things, and you're 100% right. So moving forward with the upcoming transits for the month, let's see. Coming up very soon. This will be posted on Friday, so tomorrow, being Saturday the 20th, we have the solar eclipse in Cancer at 0 degrees Cancer. And that is a fun one. Let's see. That one is that one we have. So it's obviously conjunct the North Node by about a degree. But we have the Moon, the Sun in Cancer at 0 degrees. It's loosely conjunct Hygeia, but opposite the trans-Neptunian object Ixion, as well as Quaoar. And I bring those two up, as well as both of those are square to Dike, which has just moved into the sign of Libra. And Dike is the goddess of justice. It represents justice and kind of common justice among the people and the common law. as well as traditions and moral codes that are passed on from one generation to the other. So I bring that into the fray because we're seeing a lot of that concept is being questioned. And I think it's just interesting that for this upcoming solar eclipse, justice and also, but you know, the idea of justice that we've passed on, like, is it up to par? I guess is my idea with it, because we're having, going back to what you were saying earlier, it's like with the whole George Floyd situation and coming up to now, it's like people want justice for these injustices done by the police, and like we traditionally, like if tradition says one thing, or if the traditional moral code says one thing, is that correct? Do we need to transform that, or does that need to change? And because the eclipse is square to that asteroid, I would say that that concept is kind of brought up. And Dike is the she so like Dike and Astray, I think is pronounced, represent the same mythological person, but they Dike is Libra and Astray is Virgo as far as like the mythology. She was put up into the constellation because she got sick of humanity. She during the Golden Age, mythological Golden Age, things were great on Earth, and then she didn't like how ugly mankind got during the Iron Age and the Bronze Age, so she Zeus put her up into the stars as the constellation Virgo, and then her scales became Libra. But it just is interesting. She is at that point right now, that middle point between Virgo and Libra, where what she represents. But just that concept mixed with, I bring up Ixion because Ixion, like his mythology is interesting, but what he represents is the idea of like, you know, you mess up, you do something wrong, and like you're given another shot, but then you squander that and just mess up again because you don't learn from your mistakes, you don't learn from your second chances. And like then that's the negative, and the positive is you do learn from your second chances, you do learn, and it's about forgiving oneself and forgiving, like, because when you mess up, you have to forgive yourself to be able to move forward and to have a second chance as well. It's not just from other people. And so with Ixion conjunct the South Node, it's like a lot of the negatives of that are coming up. But I just think it's interesting because like those concepts in our culture right now and what we're talking about, it's like, do people deserve a second chance? Like, and who does, and like why, and like, do they earn it, or like have they, gone through the work? And so just adding that extra influence, we have that mixed with this idea of like looking at justice, and then I guess just with the Cancer new moon, which I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I just wanted to kind of bring those two into the fray.
I think it's interesting that it is squaring the Dike. That's interesting because I think that one of the things that we're learning is just because you feel emotionally in the moment that you are pushing towards justice does not mean that that's actually the case. I think that could be a little bit of that square. I've been seeing just through Twitter and through social media, a lot of people have been kind of on crusades to root out the iniquitous, the people that are the bad people, so to speak. And a lot of that is animated by deep emotions, emotions that have really been kind of brought to the surface over recent events. But that idea of the emotionally cathartic witch hunt for the bad people always feels good in the moment, but history tends to judge that badly. And I think that that's one of the things that we've got to remember is just because we feel emotionally justified does not mean that we're enacting justice. To give a really specific example, there was a video of a mentally challenged individual that was seen on the street and reacted to a person that was questioning them about issues badly and was kind of calling for her dad, and she was an adult, and she was just trying to get out of the situation and was not very intelligent. And you could kind of tell that there was not a lot going on. And in that interaction, this person was made to feel afraid. And then that interaction was kind of broadcast across Twitter to everybody as like this own, I just own this woman. She's she's a racist, you know, when the reality is most people looking at that would realize that no, you didn't. You just made a mentally not all there woman feel scared, and in your search for justice for people that have probably done really bad things to you over the course of your life, you scapegoated this one woman and it was a bad thing. You know, it's like, I don't really know how to express that better, but there's a lot of people that are kind of out for heads and out for blood right now because there's a certain amount of social sanction for doing that. That's not always there. But the thing to remember is that just because we feel emotionally justified in the moment does not mean that we are doing justice.
I completely agree with you, and especially it's so emphasized that I think that highlights perfectly the month, the Cancer season, because we have. I mean, Cancer is subjective emotions. It's purely subjective. It's not about like the other. It's not about universal emotions. It's I feel this way for whatever reason. I mean, we don't, and so then this will either make me feel better or worse or whatever by doing these sets of things, and that's obviously individual to the person. But the idea is that yeah, it's and Cancer, like as cliche as this is, a crab, like you go poke a crab, it's gonna like quickly run away and like try to like scuttle away to its little home, and like it's not trying to like fight you like you go poke a lion, it's a completely different story. And so the idea is like does satisfying your subjective emotion in the moment ultimately lead to something better, or is it just satisfying your subjective feeling in the moment? Like, and it doesn't dismiss someone's feeling in the moment, it just means, I guess, just if people were to learn better boundaries and better kind of like self regulation as far as that goes, like, you know, you might have your own subjective emotions and those are perfectly okay, but to learn where those end and where the rest of society begins and to not let those bleed over, I guess, because, they can influence your decisions, but to not meld the two, because we're talking about like someone's subjective feelings influencing society, and then that's the dynamic between the Cancer Capricorn, because society is Capricorn and then subjective like self is Cancer, and it's like, I guess, just to it's okay to have the subjective self, but to recognize it for what it is, I guess. And that's what I mean by the boundaries, because it's like putting things where they belong instead of trying to like just go everything is everything, like just free for all. Like it's like no, like you ha- certain things belong in certain places and they're better there because they function better there, I guess. It's so in that sense, like, and so I agree, like it's for people to like this next month, because a lot of like with the Mercury retrograde happening in Cancer, as well as we have this solar eclipse at 0 degrees Cancer, it's like the next month, like it's okay, like process your feelings on stuff, like how things be subjective, that's fine, but the idea is to not then, instead of doing that, you want to like externalize it, and that's where the bad boundaries happen, because it's like no, don't externalize it.
What I think is kind of interesting about this Cancer season, and I think one of the big themes is going to be this need for kind of emotional catharsis that Cancer is about, and there is a need for emotional catharsis. So we shouldn't downplay the good of Cancer. Cancer is like about feeling something completely and letting it kind of run through you so that you can be comfortable again. Sometimes you got to go through the waves of discomfort to feel comfortable again. And Cancer is always aiming for comfort. And sometimes you need that big emotional expression to get to comfort. But the issue I think that's going to kind of come back again and again over the course of this month is that emotional demand kind of by the crowd could be met with temporal authority, like the Capricornian energy, stepping back. We're already kind of seeing this start to happen with Atlanta, where there's shifts of police that are not showing up to work because they feel disrespected. And as police forces across the US don't show up to work, as that order kind of moves away from the table, are people going to be able to control their emotions enough not to cause the kind of chaos that will lead to a kind of reactionary retrenchment of that authority? So I think that's the big game kind of in play right now is there's a certain amount of temporal authorities that are going to be willing to go off the game board for a little while. And their hope is that the chaos that ensues is what kind of reinstates them as authority figures. Because the entire authority of our current like criminal justice and police institution is what's really being looked at right now. That's what people are of all different stripes are looking at. Some people are defending it. Some people are wanting to abolish it completely. But that's kind of the question that's on deck. How much self-control do we have as communities where we don't need the external force brought to bear? And if there's communities that don't have that self-control and we see a lot of chaos, the natural response of kind of humanity to chaos is they're willing to put up with corrupt order in order to deal with chaos in the long term.
I want to just ask you, like, what do you think? So going off of that, what do you think will happen then? So we have Saturn moving from Aquarius back into retrograding back into Capricorn. Do you think the attitudes will change? It seems like, I think like to me, Saturn and Aquarius kind of like gave power to like the idea of like, you know, the Chaz chop and that idea of like, you know, community, like authority is in the community. Whereas like, as it moves back into Capricorn, I think, yeah, people will go, oh, okay, maybe we, you know, cause it's like Saturn's giving us one last taste of Capricorn before it moves all the way into Aquarius for good for the, you know, for another 30 years. And I think, you know, maybe I guess I'm asking and also saying like, I think during that time when Saturn retrograde goes back into Capricorn is when people will kind of go, or maybe it will be once Saturn goes direct in Capricorn, but like people will kind of go, okay, we do like the, you know, exactly what you said, I guess is we you know, we maybe we do like the police or we do need it in certain areas or we do, or whatever it is, like maybe not the police, but just authority. It's like, you know, it's like, oh no, we can do it together as a community, like Saturn and Aquarius, like, you know, but then it's like, let's make sure we have it correct before we do that, I guess. And so it's just, it's interesting. And so I think that will definitely come out, you know, those ideas will come to the surface, like with what you're saying, people will start to go, oh, maybe we didn't, because it's like, it's perfectly timed with like the Saturn in Aquarius, it seems like, because as it's, you know, about to retrograde back into Capricorn. And I have a feeling in the next like week or two, we're going to see a shift in people's attitudes as far as, I mean, we're already starting to see it, like you said, because with the police, like you said in Atlanta, this is like the turning point, and then it's going to cause a ripple effect. But yeah, so I just want to emphasize what you're saying with the astrology of it. It's like I'm will be interesting to see in the next couple of weeks, like as Saturn moves back into Capricorn, like what shifts with people and their attitudes about that.
I would expect when Saturn moves back into Capricorn, you see a little bit of a retrenchment of authority. Like the issue is the police are a symbol of us ceding authority over our community, so that we don't have to do the hard work of actually keeping order in our community. So police were kind of created, you know, there's a lot of different creation points that of it's where we used to have in small towns, you'd have a posse that would get together and deal with any lawbreakers, or you would put people that had done minor transgressions against the community and like pillories and throw rotten fruit at them or whatever. Police was basically a way to cede authority to people that were supposed to maintain the law. And what people don't realize all the time is how much work it is to actually keep your community safe. And in some areas, the police don't have much interest in keeping a community safe. And I can understand why there's a pushback against them in some communities more than others. You know, that's not always equitable. But I would suspect when Saturn moves back into Capricorn, you see more of a retrenchment and more of a reactionary wave against what people see as chaos right now. That's just what I would expect from the astrology of it.
On the 22nd of June, Neptune will station retrograde and will be retrograde for most of the summer into the fall. Let's see. Then on the 24th, Venus goes direct.
Finally.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. What a fun 6 week. What is that? 6 weeks or something? 40 days? Yeah, yeah. What a fun
40
time.
days and 40 nights.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Oh, what a fun time that's been. So that'll be good. That'll look. And, I think you had mentioned this off air, but just the fact that with this, the solar eclipse happening on the 20th, that we have Venus retrograde and also Mercury retrograde, kind of bookending it on either side, which is just kind of something to point out. You had mentioned that off air. I just wanted to bring that up. And so back to moving forward. Let's see. We have on 24th is Venus goes direct, and then on the 27th Mars moves into Aries, and this is gonna be fun. Mars. This is the sign that Mars will eventually go retrograde in, coming up in September and through the fall. And as Mars, trudges its way through Aries, getting closer and closer to Eris, it will be start to square all those Capricorn planets, and that's we'll talk about that more. That happens late July, moving into August, and then through the fall, and we'll talk about that more. But just the fact that Aries is going, or Mars, excuse me, is going into Aries. It's his home sign. It's comfortable. It starts a new cycle through the zodiac.
You had Mars conjunct Neptune like a week ago in Pisces. And I think that kind of what you're collecting during Mars and Pisces is the martyrs for Mars and Aries to fight for a little bit. And I feel like people are in that fight. Not only does Mars go into Aries during a major presidential election that's probably has the US more polarized than it's been a long time, but you also have kind of scuffles starting to happen on the streets, where people are getting shot from kind of all sides. There's police officers that have been shot. There is more people that have been shot. People have lost their eyes from tear gas, and there's a lot more evidence of all the things that are kind of going on. So I feel like that militancy and really kind of seeps into the system in a deeper way than what we've seen before. And I think that militancy might actually be coming from Saturn moving back into Capricorn. The reimposition of order will create like a pretty big pushback against it. So I think Mars and Aries is not going to be a very comfortable time to be in a lot of places in the world, but it's certainly not going to be a comfortable time in the US just because of where it falls on our political calendar and how much passions are already kind of up.
With Mars there, yes, I do agree that I think with both the Saturn moving into Capricorn and then the Mars into Aries, it's like there hasn't been that much pushback. You're right. Like pushback in the sense of like pushback against the violence that is happening. Like regardless of there is violence happening. Things are burning. People are not like it isn't just peaceful protests, and so people have with the Mars and Pisces, people have not put up with it, but they've just been okay. Like, what's going to happen? I see so many people frustrated, both on the right, especially on the right with the president, and like saying like, what is he doing? Why isn't you have people on the right wanting him to like bring in the National Guard, like to Seattle and to the Chaz Chop, and like there's just like this pause. But like once Mars moves into Aries and once Saturn moves back into Capricorn, like that would be the time that would happen. Like it's like, or it won't, because there's it isn't always the negative. Like people can be wise. Like Capricorn can be wise. Like Mars and Aries can be like Aries at the most ideal is like the Zen warrior who doesn't fight but can fight if need be. But like again, that's like 1% of the population. Most people just express aggression because they want to win and fight and be and that's unfortunate. But I agree with you. It's like that tension is going to build up, and then once Mars moves to then start aspecting Eris and then Pluto, and to square Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter, all the Capricorn planets, it's like that's the time, like when, so it's like all of this is just like, not that this is nothing, but this is not full on yet. And I'm not saying that it will get there, but like as Mars moves into Aries, we'll start to see like where things are going, depending on the course of where things go, like practically speaking. Because like if things start to get worse and worse and worse, then yes, it's going to be a fucking blow up once Mars conjuncts Eris and squares those planets. But if things are not going in that direction, they're starting to it seems like things are then it won't be that bad. And like that's where it's like we can watch the next month to see that buildup happening, and we'll see what direction it's going, depending on like how the archetypes express themselves. Because human beings have free will. We have a choice. We can avoid civil war if we want to.
Definitely.
I mean, yeah.
But I mean, I think it's important to kind of look at the bigger pictures globally too. So you've got India and China involved in a border dispute right now. You've got South Korea and North Korea involved in a dispute. You've got a lot more shaking down in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine right now. So Mars and Aries, it's not just going to be expressed in the US, it's going to be expressed across the world. And the fact that it's going retrograde in Aries, it's like you can't expect any gains made before the retrograde to stay, is what I would guess. I would think that war would be you would think that war would be and conflict have not as much utility as they usually do, since it's going to go into that retrograde. That those gains might have to be renegotiated. So whoever looks like they're winning might not be the one that actually wins through the whole thing. But I like to move on to the Jupiter conjunct Pluto coming up.
So both Jupiter and Pluto are retrograding in Capricorn. They are conjunct on the 29th of June. Let's see, at 24 degrees Capricorn. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've been seeing the buildup of this. One of the things that Jupiter does is it kind of puts a magnifying glass on whatever it's touching. And some of the kind of critical fails of our institutions, or the systemic problems with our institutions, are getting looked at probably more than they have been in years. And as Jupiter moves towards that conjunction, you might expect that magnifying glass to get kind of more and more intent on the target of corruption in our institutions, or corruption in our systems. And I believe you said this, but this is the day of the cops trial in Minneapolis. The first day of the cops trial in Minneapolis.
It's like their first trial. Yeah, and it just it adds to the kind of like, that it's a very important. I mean, obviously it's a very there's been a lot of contention about, whether to charge them with, third degree or second degree murder, because depending on whether they can prove stuff and whether a jury will convict them, because if they can get off, then that would be horrible, because then that'd be horrible just because justice wouldn't be served, but also because then we would see, the justified reaction to that, like what the hell's going on, and it would just highlight exactly what we're talking about. So that's my concern, is that the people who say that they are overcharged and they're going to get off, that is an issue. And then the other side is they could also just get charged and things will go and justice will be served, in the sense that, like, obviously the mob wants to just take them out. I mean, if you just throw them to the mob, they'll tear them up and then justice is served, quote unquote. But we live in a country and in times when justice has to happen slowly, in the sense that you go through a process. But if that can happen, I don't know. I don't know if it's the full trial. I know it, might be pre-trial or something like that, but it's whatever information comes out of that, regardless of what, how big of a trial it is, it's going to be important. Like, we see, the media, like, regardless of what happens, like we saw with when they were just charged with something, the media blew it up and made it a big deal, and the people reacted. And so we could see, like, this is now starting to actually deal with the legal aspect of it. So yeah, I think depending on where it goes, and so, because of how the planets work and stuff, it's like they will express themselves dependent on how people deal with it. And so it's like, if there's corruption involved, then things can be manipulated and twisted. But if there's, if justice is served, then I see that as a high. I mean, Pluto and Jupiter together in Capricorn can be a positive thing. It's not like you have it. There's also highly the potential for things to not go, justice not to be served, and then things to blow up, basically. I mean, if you see, like, Pluto, Jupiter thing, it'll blow up. So idealistic me wants things to, justice to be served and things to kind of move in that direction, as far as, and so it's like it blows up that aspect of it. But we'll see, I guess. I think that's yeah. What are your
I think that we'll see. I think that the fact that there's more people looking critically at some of our systems is good. There's quite a few people that are just like destroy all of our systems, like, and I don't think that that's going to catch on with very many people. But
That's Eris.
actual honest, kind of an honest auditing of some of our systems and real transformation based on that auditing could be really beneficial for us long term, whether it satisfies the emotions of everybody that's set off right now or not doesn't really matter in the long term of that, so that's the last that I'll say about that.
No, I want to build off of that because you made me think of it's like something that I've realized, and it's more general, but it applies there. It's like with the when people describe astrological archetypes or whatever, like the potentials of what could happen, it's usually the extremes. It's like or just in general, it doesn't have to be astrology, but I think what you're describing is the reality. Like the reality is always kind of more boring and kind of more just like, just like, oh, okay, somewhere in the middle, it's more boring. But like when people talk, it's usually the extremes. It's like it's either, one extreme or the other, or like, you're either you want this side or the other, but it's like the reality always usually somewhere more in the middle. And so what you're saying is 100% true. It's like it's boring and it's slow and it's frustrating, and it does, you don't get your immediate feeling need met, like whether it's you want justice right then in that moment. So it's just like just fuck this guy, I'm gonna tear him up and then I feel better. It's like, but no, but that's like a very temporary, short term. And so you're right. And I think that's with all those planets in Capricorn, that kind of to me is like it's a slow process. It isn't just like, whereas Uranus like is changes that will happen like boom because something shocks the system and it just flips and changes and things are different. That's not what the archetypes are right now, in my opinion, where it's like it is about transformation, but it's the process that exactly what you were describing is that like slower kind of like, yeah, it's frustrating and like feels, and people are kind of like, will let their feelings go off in different directions, but the process is still happening, I guess. And so it's like taking a step back. And I think for the individual to like incorporate kind of skills of like taking a step back and like looking at like, okay, the process is happening. Like it might not be what I specifically want exactly, but you're never going to get what you specifically want exactly. And no one will. But if the process is overall as a whole moving in the right direction, then that's something to cheer for. I think, like going back to it's never as exciting or as horrible as people make it out to be. It's never as great or grand or magical or horrible and destructive and terrible as people make it out to be. It's usually somewhere in the middle, and that's kind of boring. So that's why we don't talk about. Yeah.
Well, we are a nation of stories and storytellers, so we like the big instead of just the little. Yeah. So yeah, I totally agree with all that.
Yeah, whether it's the worst thing ever or the best thing ever, we like it's like grandiose in both directions, and it's it's nice to think about those things, and it's kind of it can highlight, like in astrology, I like that because it highlights the potentials for the archetypes. Like you have the potential here at this end, and you have the potential here at this end. So everything in between is possible, I guess, for the expression of the archetype. And so I think highlighting those two give people like a nice like what you said, like a story of like these are the potentials, but you gotta like, I think we gotta like kind of practice finding that middle ground of whatever. But anyways, I think it's an important concept. Just, I mean, that's more philosophical life advice, whatever. But I just think it matters, especially now, because things are just, there's so much intense astrological stuff happening that it's like you're better off finding like some kind of philosophical center. But
the good news is we're moving out of the really highly that Sun square Mars was so highly polarized and so dual, dealing with Gemini and Pisces at the same time, that moving out of that has felt like people kind of coming back to their heads a little bit more and thinking through things a little bit more. So we can hope that cooler heads prevail in the future. The other thing that Jupiter does, though, it does exaggerate the energy of anything that is conjunct with. So, that can have positive and negative impacts. In general, Jupiter tends to lean towards better and higher organizations of society rather than towards destruction. So Jupiter does not tend to be a destructive influence wherever it touches. The worst thing that it does is kind of pushes people towards excess, which can be destructive in the long term for sure.
Yeah. I just want to touch on that because you're right. Pluto, as well as Ceres, but Pluto also represents extremes. I mean, it represents kind of like, I mean, in my opinion, it's the idea of like either or because it has to do with the myth of like Persephone and the whole idea of like, taking her for 6 months and then giving her back to her mother for 6 months, that kind of like extreme shifting. And, we could see that like where it's like that extreme, the blowing up of extremes basically is my point, is like what you just said with the Jupiter expands what it touches. It's like part of Pluto is extremes. It's going to extremes. It's like going from one extreme to the other. And then in that that's where you can also get transformations and extremes internally, like an emotional kind of like emotional sense. And so I just wanted to add that because it's like we're seeing like a blow up of like you're either with me or you're against me. I mean, it was amazing for like a few days. It was like this like attitude of like if you don't do anything or say anything or this, and that to me is all Pluto because it's on one hand it's control and manipulation. But it's also it's coming from it's like deep psychological stuff and addressing deep psychological stuff, and it's also like either or mentality, like going to either extreme, and like that all that is blown up. And so I just wanted to, and so when things get blown up, they get addressed, in my opinion. Like for better or for worse, they get addressed. Like you can't address something if you don't see it and it's not right in your fucking face. Because why would you? Like there's so much stuff going on. Why would you address something that's just kind of on the side? So as things get blown up, that's a good thing because it puts it right in your face. And like, and whether it's like as a society or on the individual level, like you have to address those things in yourself. So I just, yeah. So right after the Jupiter Pluto conjunction, on the 1st of July, Saturn retrogrades back into Capricorn. And so this I just want to bring it up on that day. We've touched on this a lot in the past, what we've talked about, but this is the day that it happens. And so it'll be retrograde. And I don't know the exact day, but I know it moves back into Aquarius, I think in November at some point. And it will, or maybe it's December actually, because then it will conjunct Jupiter in very early Aquarius, but that's December. So we'll talk about that. But just so it's basically like the chunk of time is from roughly July 1st into sometime maybe November, December. So just know that that's the time when Saturn will be in Capricorn. It's in its home sign, but there might be kind of a reverting back to that kind of like authority and looking to authority for authority being the police, etc., government for the for safety, security, whatever, for the authority for what you need.
Yeah, we can't forget that there's the global pandemic that's still like kind of a sub theme right now.
Oh yeah, holy
across
shit.
The world.
That just like yeah.
But Saturn moves back into.
It just disappeared.
It kind of has, but Saturn moves back into Aquarius December 17th. So, and then it moves back in there to stay. I don't think it'll go back into Capricorn again after that.
No. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for checking that. Yeah, exactly. And then like a few days after that, it conjuncts Jupiter. So it's just kind of like it moves right back into Aquarius, and then all of a sudden Jupiter comes into conjunct. I think on like the 21st or 22nd. So it's I think that's going to be like, it's like the next 6 months or whatever it is until that time is going to be fucking hard. Like, I mean, it's just, I mean, obviously like we can, without astrology, you could say that just because of the election and all the stuff that's going on in culture, but it's like, there's going to be some sigh of relief if that happens. And I'm not saying it's going to be magical or great, but Jupiter and Saturn together isn't the worst conjunction in my opinion. And I think like, I mean, those two rule society, like they rule everything that they like, Saturn, Kronos and Zeus are the two like the two rulers of all the gods. Like, so them two together conjunct in Aquarius, I think it'll be interesting. We'll talk more about that in another episode, but I look forward to that. And then that will set the stage then for what's coming in like 2025 and beyond, but that's a whole nother topic.
it's going to be interesting to see like what all goes down in the 4th of July in the U.S. That's the U.S.'s birthday. It's a full moon eclipse. It is in the midst of kind of a resurgence of push for lockdown because a lot of states are getting more cases right now of COVID-19. So there's a certain underground push for more lockdown, but then there's, I think, in equally or greater resistance to any more lockdown that's kind of happening in the U.S. So like that Capricorn sense of limits and security versus comfort during that eclipse is going to be pretty interesting. How many people are going to go out to see fireworks or to celebrate? How many localities or states are going to try to crack down on anybody going out, you know? Like, how will this interplay with all the protests that are going on? And will this be part of it? You know, will there be protests against, you know, America for all the shadow material, like during this time? And how will that create a reactionary wave? I think that the fact that it's a full moon eclipse on America's birthday is not the symbolism of that is not lost on me. There's a lot of unsureness about which direction we're going and whether that direction is a good one right now.
No, I agree completely, and I think the symbolism there is kind of interesting. Like, it's like the build up to that has been, everyone exactly what we know. But I'm just saying, like, to get to that point where it's like we have a mix of health concerns, COVID, all that stuff, mixed with, is America worth celebrating kind of idea? Like, what are we celebrating, I guess, in America? Like, what should we celebrate versus what should we not? Like, and it's all kind of, it's interesting that the buildup of the next month, like, I think that, and that being the final kind of eclipse of the season until next, I think December, is interesting, and just, it kind of like culminates everything. And, the main planet, or excuse me, asteroid that is conjunct being, Vesta, like, I think will kind of highlight the tone for at least some of the people who are, I guess, patriotic in the sense of like they still want to maintain America, because I guess my point being, like, America, we're really big on, like, family, home, tribe, like our nation. Vesta adds to that. Vesta represents like the communal fire, the sacred fire that is always burns. It represents, and so we pass it from one generation to the next, the sacred fire. But on a personal level or on a spiritual, psychological level, it represents like the sacred fire that burns inside ourselves. And when that goes out, then, I mean, all the Olympian gods, quote unquote, the planets, like Zeus valued Vesta Hestia so much because she tended the flame of the Olympian gods. And so without that flame, there wouldn't be like whatever we consider to be what the planets, the gods, represent in our psyche. And so, if that makes sense, so it's like anytime mortal men would sacrifice to Hestia Vesta, or sacrifice to the gods, they would sacrifice to Vesta first. And it's like, so on a metaphorical level, it means like, it's like, in order to have psychological wholeness, I guess, or some sort of like psychological like foundation, you have to have that Vesta quality of setting the foundation, burning that sacred flame and then building upon that. And like, because astrologically, there's one quote I just want to read real quick, that represents, just so we don't have Apollo or Apollon as like a planet in astrology. I mean, it's a Uranian planet, but I don't want to get into that whole shit. But Apollon is the god of the sun. He was the one who pulled the sun across the sky. So to me, I see that as metaphorically like our sun sign. And so I just want to read this quote. Glorious is your portion and your right, for without your mortals hold no banquet. Without you mortals hold no banquet. Where one does not duly pour sweet wine in offering to Hestia both first and last. Hestia, you who tend the holy house, temple of the Lord Apollo, And that just, it's, we talk about astrology, it's like, the sun sign, like, is vital. Like, it's our core who we are. And like, you can't have the sun sign, or metaphorically, like the psychological sun sign, what that means for us, that center, basically our center, our self psychologically, without tending to the fire, like what Hestia represents. And so, metaphorically or symbolically, I just think that, like, it's interesting that that concept of, like, that fundamental concept, it's like, my personal opinion is that fire is burning out in our culture. That kind of concept of, like, you need to maintain the communal fire that we all connect to, but we all have our individuality, but we all can connect at that communal fire. Because, like, Hestia Vesta rules, like, the hearth in the home, but also the hearth in the town. That is basically the extension of the home. It's like the town is your family on a greater scale. And so you can apply that to anything. It could be the nation. The nation is your family on a larger scale. And as a nation, we're not tending to the fire of Vesta. We're not tending to the hearth. Like, we're trying to, and it shows why we're so disconnected and scattered and just ungrounded because it's like everything else in the psyche, or whatever you want to call it, like all the other gods, you have to have that fundamental hearth, that fire burning, in order for them all to then function. Like, there's a lot of stories in mythology of how all the gods, like, especially Zeus, really valued what Hestia did in Olympus. And it's like, and what that can mean practically in modern times is, like, the psychological parts represented by the different gods value having that fundamental fire burning, and like that fundamental connection that we all have. And I think that that's because it is, like, directly conjunct the sun on this day, and it happens to be America's birthday, and it happens to be, and just with everything going on, the symbology there is like, you know that's what we need, like, and not tribalism, like a fundamental hearth that we all value and we all can come back to. And it doesn't mean that we all have to agree, because all the gods were different. They all had their own stories, their own adventures, but they all had that same hearth that was always tended to by Hestia Vesta. She doesn't have very many stories because she was always just in Olympus tending to the hearth. And it's like, as a metaphor, like, we all can have our own, the gods do their thing, but they all know that that hearth is always burning. And I feel like we need to make sure that that hearth stays burning, because it's like, it's all metaphorical. Like, think about it, like, what does that represent? Because Hestia Vesta also rules the home. Like, she introduced building a home to mankind. And so that idea of what does that mean metaphorically, it's like, your home is like where you're safe, where you're secure, where you can be you without any judgment from the outside world, or any of all those things. And so I guess I just want to, like, emphasize those themes for this specific full moon, because it's like, being on America's birthday, and just like those themes seem to be kind of idealistic American, like, or not even American, they're world themes, they're human themes, they're not. But I'm just saying, specifically for our chart, like, because it is conjunct the sun that day, and then that full moon is conjunct our natal sun.
I'll add one thing to it. What's really under threat is, I mean, on 4th of July, what most people do, at least in my neck of the woods, is they get together around a grill, and they get together with their family and they feed each other. It's like any American tradition is a oral tradition, in the sense that we eat. We eat together. And not only do you have the grill, which is like the fire that feeds the community, or it feeds the friends and family, but you also have the recognition of the shared sacrifice, which is the fireworks, right? And people come together for to witness the fireworks, the shared sacrifice that created the ability to have the hearth, and the ability to have the community that we have. So there's for safety, there's going to be a push to put out those fires, to not have the community get together, to not have the recognition of shared sacrifice, to not have the community grill, that brings people together and reminds them of what are the good parts of our country, which has always been its people. Like, for whatever problems we've had, we've come together and done good things together. So I feel like that's like a big thing. There's fear, like those fires shouldn't go out. Those fires should be held up, and we shouldn't allow fear to keep those fires from happening. So it'll be interesting to see what comes forward from that.
Yeah, I completely agree, and just with what you just said, like Mercury retrograde will happen to conjunct Hygeia that day, and so it's just there might be like a miss. Depending on your view, it might be great information coming out to tell people to be cautious and health information, or it might be just kind of like a miscommunication, if we're gonna Mercury retrograde of health stuff, saying like, oh, don't go out, don't, but at the same time, yeah, it's that happens a few hours, so that the Mercury Hygeia conjunction happens earlier in the day on the 4th, you know um American time zone wise, but then later in the night, then the full moon happens, and so it's just kind of interesting. So we'll probably get that morning. We'll probably see on the news like a few stories of don't go out and don't go to barbecues and don't go to view the fireworks, blah blah. Don't go to parades, and then people will, and then I think it'll be fine. I just think it'll be interesting because we'll see that, and it's because it's Mercury and Hygeia. They're both quicker moving, and they're not like slow moving transformational planets, and so it's just kind of like a temporary superficial thing, but it will happen. It'll be interesting because at the exact same time also the moon will be opposing those two at that conjunction, and so it's like adding the moon into that. It's just like a very quick reactive thing, and then it will pass, but it will happen probably. So something to point out.
Yeah, and that's pretty much, is that one of the last things that Mercury does before it goes direct?
Exactly, yes. And so basically it will move, I think, to like 4 or 5 degrees of Cancer, and then so then after that it moves direct, and that moves direct on the 12th of July. And so then on the 12th of July, Mercury goes direct, and let's see what we have. We have at 5 degrees, and at this point, then Mercury will go direct. Mars, we have Mars starting to move to conjunct Chiron, and then basically starting to move into the second, moving through its shadow period basically soon. But we also then have the Sun starting to oppose all of the late Capricorn planets and asteroids, and so on the 12th, as Mercury goes direct, the Sun will be at 20 degrees Cancer, and then the following few days we have on the 14th, the Sun will oppose Jupiter. I think a day or two before it will oppose Pallas, but then on the 14th it opposes Jupiter. The 15th it will oppose Pluto, and then finally on the 20th of July, we have a new moon in Cancer, but the Sun will also be opposed. The Sun and Moon will also be opposing Saturn in late Capricorn, and so that's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, that's what I refer to it as, fun. No, the interesting thing about this is, man, there's going to be a lot of kind of retrenchment of institutional power. There's going to be a lot of kind of roiling under the surface anger in the public. There's going to be a lot of tribalism, I think, during this time. Sun in Cancer tends to be clannish, tribal, opposing all that Capricorn. It's like people saying that they know what's best for you and they're going to take care of it is not going to be very accepted during this time. If there's going to be a place where you really see another pop off of kind of the conflicting energy that we're seeing, it's not going to be as polarized, but it's going to be more against the entrenched systems rather than against each other. That it's going to be then. It's going to be from the 14th to like the 20th is when I would expect more tension to kind of come to the surface in the U.S. because this is when our sun is going to be. The sun is going to be opposite the U.S.'s Pluto, the U.S.'s charts Pluto. There's just a lot of energy going on there. So I would suggest that things heat up towards the end. We start feeling like we're in the pot a little bit again towards the end of Cancer season.
I agree completely. I think it'll be a kind of like a temporary, superficial kind of like, um, oh yay, like 4th of July, this is fun, like everyone we're into fireworks, and then it will be like, oh shit, we're right back into it. I completely agree, and just to add to that, like exactly what you're saying, like specifically, we have the moon and sun at 28 Cancer, the North Node 28 Gemini, South Node 28 Sagittarius, Saturn 28 Capricorn. There's this weird inconjunct thing happening, and because the nodes, the North Node and South Node, have all to do with the Sun and Moon's relationship. I mean, that's why they exist. I feel like there's this weird inconjunct. There's two inconjuncts happening between Sun and Moon, South Node, North Node, Saturn. And I don't know what that's called, if it has a name, if it's like there's two parallel lines, but it's just interesting that like that is also happening that day as well. Just to kind of add to like the weirdness, I guess, and the confusion, and kind of like the just it's going to be an interesting. I just agree with you. It's going to trigger like that new moon is going to trigger, in my opinion, what like we thought this past year was bad so far. Like if it's going to get bad, in my opinion, it's going to be during all of Leo and halfway into Virgo. Like that's the time slot that I'm giving for like the worst, like the worst, but also potentially it could be fine. But I'm just saying, like if there is, that's the window of time that the potential is there. So I just wanted to, but just the inconjuncts are interesting to me. There's like a lot of weird like not compatible energy happening right now, and it kind of just to add to the forcing of transformation and kind of forcing of people to look at things like when things are uncomfortable, we have to look at things more than when they're comfortable. So I just
There is a lot of things in the cardinal signs too. You got Cancer, you got Capricorn, and then you got Aries, all represented. So that tends to be things happening. Cardinal tends to be things actually happening in the physical world, becoming manifest. So happy Cancer season, everybody. It's been good talking to you.
yeah, we'll see you next month and in Leo.